What's up, everyone? Welcome to season 4 of My Boulevard podcast. This season, we're doing something special. I am here with my co-host, Missie. Say what's up to the people, Missie.
Hello. I'm so excited to join you, Dahadi. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to talk about the who, what, when, where, how, and why of urban missions.
That's right. This season, we are going to be walking through together, like live, real conversations. We're going to be talking about real questions, really practical wisdom about how to do ministry in urban environments.
Yeah, this is going to be a primer for all of us. So let's join this journey. Let's grow, learn, and push forward urban missions together.
Stay tuned. This season, we're going to talk about how you can do ministry where you live, where you work, and where you worship. So let's go.
Let's go.
Welcome to the My Boulevard podcast. My name is Dahadi Lewis. I know I look different today. More handsome, obviously. But
Love
Trust me.
it. Love it.
I am here with the wonderful Missie Branch.
I am Missie Branch, and this is not Dahadi Lewis today. This is
Show Baraka.
Love
So,
it. How exciting it is to have you here today.
I'm excited. It's like we just discussed. This is like my third time seeing you this week.
I
and
know.
don't know what to do
What a
with myself.
gift. Okay.
And I got to spend some time with you last week in Orlando.
We were at the conference.
Yeah, so
Yes,
this is just
absolutely. This is great. I know. Okay.
The wisdom that this woman has. Come on.
No,
somebody.
we're about to hear from you. We're about to learn. What I love is good culture.
Yes.
I have gotten to see, just as a regular person, good culture at work, at conferences and different spaces. And I've been like, okay, we got the artistry, we got the academics, we got the theology, we got the practical parenting, we got all the stuff.
That's it. We're done with the podcast. Let's go home
I like
because I'm
it.
going to ruin everything she just did.
No.
I'm going to unravel.
Okay, well, tell us, first of all, explain good culture.
I think practically good culture just came from my own heart's disposition of knowing that when I became a Christian, the Lord had to reconcile these affections that I had in entertainment, arts, but also intellectualism, I guess you can say. But then feeling like the spaces that I was in, shame to the pastors and the missionaries that I was around, but feeling like I love them, I appreciate them, but the call that they have is different from the call that I have.
Yes,
and then
absolutely.
the training and the discipleship that was given to me was making me more of a pastor and a vocational Christian than it was somebody who could go into the marketplace. And so over a span of, I will say, about 12 years, I was just wrestling with who I was, my identity, the formation that was given to me, but also knowing that there was probably a different direction I wanted to go in. Then I started to gather information, books, go to conferences, meet people, have conversations. Fast forward many years later, I think what I am trying to help others see is that when God creates in the garden, he says it is good, it is good, it is good. And good isn't just for our own personal benefit. Good is meaning charitable, meaning to be beneficial, to be a blessing unto things. And the idea of what he's doing is he's cultivating, right?
Yes.
And so John Frame, a theologian, says that culture is what we make of God's creation. And so God creates creation, but then what we do with that creation is culture. And so as the mandate in Genesis says, to go forth and, subdue the earth, multiply, I think hopefully at the end of that, we can say it is good.
I love that. I love that. Well, you too are a part of the My Boulevard family.
Absolutely.
Which we love. So how does good culture help connect faith, business, and missions in the urban context? How does the urban missionary get plugged in? And art.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I'm extremely excited about is that Dahadi he for years has had this passion to help pastors and church planners to siege the boulevard that they, have a passion or desire for. I think what happens though is that those individuals bring in these practitioners, these polymaths, these poets, and the pastors are the predominant tool or instrument for training and cultivating in those particular spaces. And what Dahadi has done, I think, is said, you know what, I've seen a deficiency in allowing space for the poets, the polymaths, and the practitioners to also be conduits of God's training and grace, et cetera, et cetera. And so now that my boulevard is all of those things, I think what we're able to do is to not only just say the pastors are the ones who are developing the missionaries, but no, you are missionaries. And not only that, you are to cultivate and disciple other missionaries within your space to go forth and to do that. And so what good culture is trying to do is just basically give a good theology of work, good praxis, and evaluation around what it means to be polymath and a poet in your particular space. And when people hear that, I'm sure by now you know that poet doesn't mean just somebody who writes poetry,
Right.
but people in the arts. And so specifically, one of the things that we're passionate about at Good Culture is what does it mean to be an artist, an academic, and an advocate? And I know this alliteration, I've been in the Baptist church.
The Lewis brothers.
Hey, ain't nothing
The
like a good alliteration.
Barakas are about some alliteration.
Hey,
Yes.
so, yeah, so we try to focus on those three areas, and it's been an interesting journey, even within the last year and a half, 2 years, of what Good Culture started to be, and what it, because it ultimately started as like a clothing brand.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
it started
right,
out,
but
yeah, it
we
started out,
elevate,
yeah,
right?
and we kind of like now
Still
it's
I
moved,
rise.
and yet still I ride. There we
Yes.
go. And now it's ultimately what I'm trying to make it is into an institute.
Love it.
So you have like the Brookings Institute, you have the Aspen Institute, you have all these institutes that create good ideas, that have good discussion and writings, and they also help support people to do good things. And so what I'm hoping to do is to be that conduit, that space for folks who have good ideas, who are thinking deeply about things and want to use those or exercise those particular ideas in the common market.
Why do you think it's important to engage artists in this way? We understand, we get it for pastors, we get it for people who have a heart for vocational ministry in the most technical term, or that we recognize. Why is it important specifically for artists?
I mean, it's almost, to me, in my opinion, like almost like a full circle moment, in the sense that artists have always, not always, historically in the church, if we're going back into antiquity, the artist was commissioned by the church. And it wasn't, they weren't these contractors or these hired hands necessarily that just existed. To some degree, I guess some of them were, but they were closely tethered to the church, and the church saw its beauty and its purpose for the artist. I think because the market, and I mean that literally, the market has literally created a dissension between the faith and the things, the cultural products that Christians can make. It's like there's no need for the church anymore, because now you have distributors, you have all these things, and you can actually be a great artist and not actually have any real connection to the church.
Yes. And
so I think it's important not only just for the actual practice, but I think it's good for spiritual formation, because when the church is absent of beauty, I think it loses its imagination.
That's so good.
And it's theological imagination, it's ways of lamenting, because artists in a lot of ways are expert lamenters. They know how to sometimes lament too much, a little bit too much.
But they communicate for us.
Yes, there is a way of making language beautiful. And I think the further that the artist is away from the church, I think the less imaginative the preaching is in churches. And I also think it's a disservice to the artist, because we naturally give ourselves to our art. And if you're doing that apart from community, that's a dangerous place to be.
Absolutely.
And so you need community. You need to be tethered to the foundation for which Christ believes that the world will be shaped and cultivated. And when artists can do that honestly, and I do think there's always going to be tension, because there are power struggles in institutions. But when pastors allow artists to have the liberty to be themselves without the fear of them being some sort of either stain to the church or being stained by the world. And then artists also trust the pastors and elders to say, look, trust, like I'm not going to just go wall out.
Yes.
And I'm not going to just use your this community for my own personal benefit to grow some sort of stardom and then act like I don't know y'all no more and not rock with y'all. You know
Yes.
And artists, we do that. Don't try to act like we don't. I think there has to be constant communication.
Yes. Yes. And I think when you think about urban spaces too, urban leaders don't have the privilege of just only talking to who sounds and looks and does what
No,
I do.
absolutely
Right?
not.
We don't have that. I have experience of being a part of a church plant where a lot of the leaders, pastors, were artists.
Yeah.
So our church drew a lot of artists, and we really got to experience what it looks like to see art come together with theology in
It
a
was
beautiful
like very
way.
dysfunctional church, very chaotic.
But it was beautiful.
Beautiful, but chaotic.
Yes,
Hey.
yes. We had to have some admins. Just I don't do art, I do admin. We had to have them
Find them jokers
Yes,
like, hey, I
yes.
don't need you to rap. I just need you to be able to do some sheets. Can you do, can you do some
Yes,
spreadsheets?
yes. But what I learned from that is our God is the ultimate artist, and He created all of these different forms of art, and they were all valuable and useful for the body. Okay, so my question becomes, how have you seen God use your art in particular, but then the artists in your community in the church to make impact?
Well, my art in particular, I mean,
Oh gosh, here we go.
life shaping.
We're none of us are the same, right? Right?
I mean,
the
I didn't say
Bible's
it.
ultimate, that's
I didn't say it.
penultimate,
I
right?
didn't say
Okay,
it.
okay.
You said it. You know what I mean?
Okay.
There is, I want to speak, I think specifically to the Christian hip hop movement. I think that this particular movement has done what I think is done to, how can I say this with proper English? I think the Christian hip hop movement has shaped the church in a similar way that I would like to say, in a much smaller scale, in a way that the civil rights movement has defined a type of individual in the church, that makes sense.
It does make sense.
All right, so during the civil rights movement, you had a particular type of individual who understood that Jesus is not just a God who is cool with us soaking up information and ignoring the injustices around us. And so there's an activity to our faith. Now, on a much smaller scale, but in a similar way, I think Christian hip hop brought a particular urban awareness, a sort of cultural like legitimacy, but also a biblical fidelity to a group of people who were feeling like, man, we are being ignored, because whether it was the racism of the white evangelical church or the snobbery or the bourgeoisie of the black traditional church, a lot of young men and women were not welcome to bring their whole self to the church.
They were displaced.
And so what most of us do, we find a community outside of that particular space.
Right.
And hip hop is the perfect community for that. And then when you have a Christian movement that says, yo, you don't have to find community outside of this space. We are here, as your husband calls urban, the urbanite. There's an urbanite that's here who reflects with you the beauties of the culture that is redeemed through a glorious Jesus.
Love it.
And so I see that like happening today, right? And I think that will continue to happen. And I think that formation is groundbreaking. So I will say, I think my music and others who are like me have contributed to this building up of a wonderful, I guess you can say, community within the kingdom of God that I hope will continue to grow and flourish, that Satan will not be able to defeat.
Well, we see it happening. We see Satan not defeating, and it's growing. It is great. Let's talk disciple making though. One of the things you said, which I know is true, is that the bourgeoisie black church was only creating disciples to be just like them, right? To do what they do. Not bad. You need to create people to be, well, not bougie, but you do need.
Bougie.
I mean, we got a hint of bougie. But that's not the goal. Is not to disciple people in that. Yeah. But what are ways? I wouldn't believe that there are specific. I make disciples differently for artists, but there's got to be different avenues in that disciple making for artists. What does that look like?
I think it can be, it runs the gamut. It can be anywhere from trying to give people all the tools that you feel like you had, or some of the tools that you've been lacking. Like, hey, here's a track. Or it could be just like, here's just a framework. I don't know. I don't really have the A to Z, but here's some guardrails, some boundaries that I just hope that you stay within. And people are nuanced. I've learned that. And sometimes artists are like, so Dottie and I have had this discussion, I think, on a previous podcast about dog theology, cat theology. And I see artists as cats. I do. I see artists as cats, but I don't see that as a bad thing.
Okay.
And so he talks about the loyalty of a dog. The dog stays in the home. And the cat, to me, is more like a missionary, but they protect the home in different ways. Like, they rats and mice, snakes.
Okay, I will give it up because I'm going to bring a cat in for that.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Okay.
And so though we don't operate within the house, you send the artists out, they go out and they roam and they do, but there is great utility in what artists do outside of the home, and very prophetic, I think, in ways in which sometimes pastors may not be. And I think this is just beautiful with art, just discipling artists how to use their prophetic voice in a way that doesn't offend the gospel, to me, is one of the most important things. Because I think what happens is that artists are so tied to their liberty. Yes. We're so tied to our self-expression. And you don't want to kill that self-expression, but you also want to give that self-expression boundaries.
Yes.
And you say, here are the limits of which the gospel puts on you, not my own personal.
No.
And I call it like the evangelical edit. I don't want to put my own evangelical edit on anybody, as I felt like evangelicalism was put on me.
Right.
It's like, but however, there are boundaries. Like there are things that will offend the gospel. And as long as you have that framework, go out and do what you want.
Yeah. I've heard you say something too, more than once, which I think is true, but I think we forget it in the along the lines of disciple making. Jesus did a great job of creating excellent disciples, but Jesus is Jesus.
Yes. Absolutely.
Jesus got it all.
He got it all.
He got it all.
No
and
deficiencies.
we in the church talk about one-on-one discipleship a lot, and it's beautiful. Yeah. But it's not the only way.
Absolutely not. Yeah. I came to faith through a college ministry, and that college ministry was heavy on one-on-one disciple, one-on-one. And praise God, it did a lot for me. But then as I began to get older, I started to realize the more that and it's not just one-on-one discipleship, it's almost like an ownership of this individual. So like if I disciple Jimmy, like, hey, Jimmy, don't be discipled by nobody. Like, don't you be going to nobody else to get this discipleship, man. You know what I mean?
That is crazy.
And it feels kind of not only dominion, but it feels in some ways cultish. I got a whole nother theology or philosophy around Christianity is a cult. So we need to stop acting like it's not. Okay? It's very cultish. It's very cultish.
We can be cultish.
It's very cultish.
We can be cliquish.
Yeah.
We can be cultish. It's because we're sinners.
Yes.
We're sinners, right? We're saved by grace, though. Yeah, come on. All right.
But anyway, divert from that heretical thought that I just had. I will say that though one-on-one discipleship is very, very important, to your point, is when Jesus does it, he's passing on all the spiritual blessings, all the spiritual resources. When we do it, we are passing on some.
Right.
But we're also passing on great deficiency as well.
Absolutely.
So as people are catching things, you talked about this last night, as people are actively catching things that we're not even communicating, what you also got to understand is they're catching good, but they're also catching some of the things that I don't do well. Yes. So we have to be very active and intentional about allowing these individuals to capture the greater beauty of the greater auspices of the church. And there's a mutual edification that we all contribute to. So when people are in small groups, when people are together in Bible studies or whatever you want to call them, it's very important that every individual in that group recognizes that they play a role in the maturation of a believer. You know what I mean? And so I just believe that, yes, go out and make your disciples, but also introduce them to a community.
Yes.
Bring them into a space where they can see people do things that you don't do well. Or things that you do well, but they do it well also, but differently maybe. So
that's great.
And that's one of the reasons why. And here's one prime example of why I love the way that the Hadi kind of leads in the church context, is that he's never been this solo communicator in the church. Since college, he's always had 2 to 3 other communicators.
Yes.
And the reason why I love that is because you come to this church, you'll hear the Hadi's kind of like charge kind of preaching, but then you used to hear like a Jono preach more of a like a heady.
Yes.
And then you hear like a James Robertson, a more practical.
Yes.
And then Deuce will come through with his real cultural,
Yes.
but theological. And it'll be, you're never going to create the church under the identity of one communicator.
And that's so good.
And I think that's the same way with discipleship, is that, yes, they should emulate or take on some of the things that you have, but bring them around other people so that they can be comprehensively
Grown and matured. That's
Mature.
great. Okay, we only have a few more minutes.
All right.
We're about to end, but if you could leave urban leaders with a piece of advice on how to sustainably integrate the arts, polymaths into the marketplace, all of that into their context, how would you say that?
So you mean like, is this more of like like financial sustaining, like for organizational sustaining and like arts through their church? Or?
Yes.
I think the one thing you got to do is first figure out what are ways in which the artists are going to contribute without there being any kind of like financial benefit. What are ways in which you can give artists opportunities to regularly practice art? So is that on a Sunday? Is that on a Tuesday? Or is that through having some sort of I guess gallery?
Right. That's
in
beautiful.
Just in a hall. Like every church has a hallway.
Yes. Let the artists do their thing.
And most of the hallways has got some ugly pictures up.
Or they got ridiculous statements.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what does that mean?
Some vinyl statement.
Yes.
Take that vinyl statement
What
down.
does that mean? Right?
Get an artist
Yes.
to do something, right?
Yes.
So that's one simple way. And that's giving you opportunity. And then maybe once a month, once a quarter, host a gallery, some sort of performance. So there's ways. I think.
Ways,
but
yes.
the first thing, as I said, is you just got to create or you got to create opportunities for them to build the muscles of either doing the art, performing the art, and the consumer, or I hate to say but the churchgoers in the community to see that this is a place where good art is being developed and cultivated
and welcomed.
Yes. And then I think that's going to give the leaders in the church a better understanding of how to integrate art, because it's going to be beneficial, because everybody, it can be the end of days. People are going to spend their money on art.
Yeah, that's the truth.
Because that's something that we need. I don't know Pavlov's hierarchy
yes,
of needs,
right,
but I'm pretty sure art is somewhere.
Yes, somewhere there, right? Yes,
it should be. You know what I mean? You got food, you got touch, but we need our imaginations to be
engaged.
And this is evident through world atrocities, whether it be the slave trade, whether it be on plantations, whether it be the Holocaust. There was always beautiful, bright, shining moments of music or art displayed. And people, despite the atrocities done unto them, knew the only way that I can remain sane is by allowing my imagination to remove me from my current circumstances, to take me to a place that is much better than this. And so I do think that the church needs this in order to expand its theological imagination. And so the more you give opportunity to that, then you'll see what the demand is like, and then you can start to create a supply.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
But I would say don't just, the worst thing you can do is just, without there ever being a demand, is just go out there and say, you know what? Our praise team needs to make an album. And then you spend $20,000 on an album and only 3 downloads, and you're like, that was...
Because anybody even told you they could sing.
And
but we're not going to go there.
All, you got some okay singers at best.
This is not the Kirk Franklin and the family.
Yeah, exactly. But then what happens is on a more serious note, is when you see that failed attempt, then you're more reluctant to do any kind of thing.
To invest in the future.
Yep.
Okay, we're out of time, but you are hosting cohorts. You are. How do people connect with you, learn from you, and gain this information?
Socials, AMISHO Baraka. And that's probably the best way.
Okay. All right.
That's how you do it.
All right. Well, I'm so glad. This is season 4 of This Is My Boulevard. And thank you so much, Sho Baraka, for being my guest.
That's the first time you call me Sho Baraka.
It is, because I always call you Amisha.
Yes. Always.